When I asked if I could move in for a while, my daughter said, "Sorry, Dad, we don't have room." That night she opened her door to find moving trucks outside. Her husband froze when he saw who was moving in. "I want you to tell me where you're watching from before I begin. Drop your city in the comments." I'm telling this in my own voice because I need it to be plain, simple, and true. I won't dress it up with big words or fancy speeches. It began on a rainy evening when the roads shone like sheet metal and every streetlight had a halo. My hands smelled like old engine oil because I had just sold my pickup for less than it was worth. The buyer counted bills at the curb and didn't look me in the eye. I watched the taillights go away and felt the empty in my chest. I had nowhere simple to go, nowhere easy. So I took a bus across town, got off 2 stops early because I wanted a longer walk to calm my thoughts, and carried my small suitcase past the maple tree that my daughter and I planted 2 decades ago with a shovel that was bigger than she was. She named that tree Pepper. The night was quiet except for the soft sound of my feet on wet leaves. I stood at her porch like any stranger, though I had built that porch with my own hands, and I knocked. The porch light blinked on. I heard voices. My daughter opened the door with a blanket around her shoulders, her hair tied up, the same way her mother used to wear it when she was cleaning on Sunday mornings. For a second, just 1 second, I saw the little girl in her, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees. "Dad?" she said, surprised, not angry yet, just unsure. I gave her a small smile to show I wasn't there to cause trouble. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice low, "could I stay here for a little while?" "Just for a while. Things are tight. I'll be quiet. I'll be helpful." In the living room behind her, the TV made a low humming noise. I could see a pile of folded laundry on the couch and a candle burning that smelled like vanilla. Her husband Ethan walked into view with his phone in his hand and a look on his face like he had stepped on something unpleasant. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer me a chair. He just looked at my suitcase. "We don't have room," my daughter said. She said it soft, as if softness could make it kind. The words still hit like a fist. Not even a guest room, I thought. Not even the couch for a few nights. Ethan stood there with his arms crossed, nodding slightly, as if she was delivering a memo they had agreed on earlier. I heard my own breath go in and out. The blanket around her shoulders slipped a little and she pulled it back up, eyes down. "I'm sorry, Dad," she added, and then she tried to make it sound practical, reasonable, something I couldn't argue with. "You know, with the baby coming, we're rearranging everything. And Ethan's parents might need to stay soon. And, well, we just don't have space." I let the words pass through me like cold wind. I remembered another night long ago when she had a fever and wouldn't sleep unless she lay on my chest, counting my heartbeats with little fingers. "I understand," I said in a flat tone that surprised even me. I lifted my suitcase. "Of course. Take care." I stepped back into the rain. I didn't go far. I sat in my car at the curb because the old heater still worked when I ran the engine for a minute at a time. I tilted the seat back and listened to the rain drum on the roof like a second hand counting off a punishment. I told myself I was a grown man, that I had been through worse, that I had survived rough winters and medical bills and burying my wife. I told myself I could handle this, but there are things that cut your heart in a special way. Your child turning you away from a door you built is one of them. I closed my eyes and saw my wife's face as clear as a photograph. The 2 lines at the corners of her eyes when she laughed. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when she was about to say something serious. The way she once whispered on our porch. "This house will shelter them even when we are gone." I gripped the steering wheel and felt something colder than anger rise inside me. Not rage, not the messy kind. This was something like ice finding its level. I fell into a memory so deep it felt like a second life. The night we signed the deed for that little house, we sat on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. Our daughter was 6 and had drawn a picture of the house with windows like happy eyes. My wife cooked noodles with butter, and we ate with plastic forks, and we laughed because the paint smelled strong and we were lightheaded with hope. I worked double shifts to build a deck, then a railing, then a swing that made our daughter squeal and kick her little legs like a swimmer. Every board I set with my wife's voice in my ear, saying, "This is for all our winters." When she got sick, I sold the boat. When the first treatment failed, I sold the motorcycle. When hospice set up a bed in our bedroom, I sold the land behind the shop too. My wife said thank you with eyes that were still bright even when her body was tired. "Promise me you'll look after her," she said one day, when the light was coming in soft through the curtains. "Promise you'll keep the house safe." I promised. The promise sits in my chest like a key. Back in the present, the rain slowed to a finer mist that made the street look like glass. Around midnight, I saw headlights turn the corner. 2 long, white moving trucks pulled up in front of my daughter's house. The drivers killed the engines and the neighborhood fell into an odd hush, like the air itself was waiting. I watched in the mirror. The truck doors slid open. Men in uniforms stepped down, zipped their jackets, and opened the back gates. Inside, I could see the clean shapes of furniture wrapped in blankets and taped tight. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. If they had no room, why were trucks here? Who needed so much space that trucks would come at midnight? My daughter's porch light flicked on. The door opened. She stepped out with that blanket around her shoulders again. Ethan followed, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And then I saw them. Ethan's parents climbed out of a black SUV behind the trucks, all dressed in smooth clothes that didn't belong to the kind of work that left blisters. His mother had a scarf wrapped high around her throat like a crown. His father carried a leather folder. They walked up the path like they owned the place, like this was a hotel where a room had been booked for them long ago. My daughter turned her face away from the street, as if she didn't want to see me, as if not seeing me would make me vanish. The movers started unloading a tall china cabinet, a massive bed, and boxes labeled in loud black marker: office, glassware, master closet. I sat up and felt my back protest. My hands were calm on my knees. I did not get out, not yet. I breathed slow and I listened to the sound of straps tightening, the soft thud of boxes set on the ground, the low little grunts men make when they carry weight. Here is something you should know about me. I do not yell when I am hurt. I do not throw things. I do not make a scene. I sit very still like a lake at dawn, and I watch for the first ripple. I understand that anger is a tool that dulls fast if you use it too often. Better to wait. Better to think. Better to pull a quiet lever. I had levers, though I had never needed them before. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the edge of an old envelope, soft with years of handling. The wax on the flap had cracked a little, but the seal still held strong. The envelope came from a safe that rests in a narrow crawl space under the house, a safe only 3 people ever knew about: me, my wife, and the lawyer who helped a stubborn, overproud mechanic understand estate law. I placed that envelope on the passenger seat like it was sleeping. I got out of the car when I was ready. The rain had reduced itself to small beads on the railing that caught the light. I walked slow up the path. My steps made a patient sound. Ethan was in the doorway giving orders to the movers, almost like a conductor tapping air with a baton. When he turned and saw me, something flickered in his eyes. He covered it with a false smile. "Hey, Tom," he said, using my first name like we were co-workers, not family. "It's late. Can we do this tomorrow?" He meant, go away. He meant, don't spoil my night. My daughter stood behind him with her hands on the blanket, twisting it like she was wringing out water. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Dad," she said, "please don't make this hard." I gave a small nod, not to agree, not to surrender, just to acknowledge that words had been said, and a moment had swung open like a gate. "I won't make anything hard," I said in a level voice. "I'll make it simple." I stepped inside without waiting to be invited. The movers paused. Ethan reached for my arm. I let his fingers touch my sleeve, and then, without force, I looked at him. He took his hand back like a child who has touched a hot stove. "We don't have room, Tom," he said, trying to sound firm. "We already explained." I walked past him to the kitchen counter, the same counter where I had once taught my daughter to crack eggs without breaking the yolk. I placed the envelope on the counter and smoothed it with my palm. The room smelled like vanilla candle and damp coats. I was calm enough to hear the small ticking of the clock on the wall, the soft squeak of a mover's boot on the floor near the door, the distant drip of water off the eaves. "Before anything goes in or out," I said, my voice steady as a level line, "there's something all of you need to see." Ethan's parents stepped into the kitchen. His mother looked at the envelope, and then at me with the kind of smile I've seen in waiting rooms. Polite, but already bored. His father adjusted his cufflink and cleared his throat and asked if this could wait because the movers were on the clock and schedules mattered. I did not look at him. I looked at my daughter. Liz, I said softly, using the short name her mother loved. Do you remember the day we planted Pepper? Do you remember how small you were? How the shovel didn't want to dig, and you kicked the dirt and said the earth was stubborn? She nodded, eyes shining, then glanced at Ethan as if asking permission to be human. He frowned. That was the moment I accepted that this had to be clean and final. I opened the envelope. I didn't rush. I didn't perform. I took my time like a man washing his hands after a long shift. I laid the papers out in a neat row. First the deed, then the updated ownership transfer that my wife and I signed after her diagnosis, then the notarized letter from our lawyer that set conditions tighter than the lid on a jar. Ethan leaned forward and read the first line. His lips moved. He looked up. The color went out of his face so fast it was almost funny. His eyes started to dart, fish in a bowl with nowhere to go. What is this? He asked, his voice thinner than usual. This can't be current. We talked about this. About all of this being, in the family. I gave him the slowest smile I have in me. The one that comes from deep under the ribs. It is in the family, I said. And I am the family that owns this house. Not you, not your parents, not your movers. Me. His mother stepped closer to the counter and pointed her manicured nail at a paragraph. This clause says you can... She stopped because her voice climbed too high and she heard it. She swallowed and started again, softer. This says you can do... Quite a lot. Ethan's father cleared his throat again, a sound like a door that needs oil. We could take this to council, he said. We could discuss... I held up my hand. I have big hands. From years of lifting things that do not forgive mistakes. No discussions, I said gently. I am not here to fight. I am not here to argue. I am here to state the terms of my home. I looked at Liz and softened my face because I never wanted to be a blade pointed at her. You told me you didn't have room. I listened. Now you will listen. I told them my terms, and I told them plainly. The house was mine, paid for, protected by documents that did not care about opinions. I had the right to decide who lived in it. My daughter could stay. Of course she could stay. She had grown here. Her laughter still lived in the drywall like birds in a tree. But her husband's parents, who had never spent one Saturday sanding the porch rails, who had never spread salt on the steps before dawn so a child wouldn't slip, would not be moving in. Not tonight, not next week, not at all. If they needed shelter, they had their own home and their own funds. I was not their safety net. I was not their spare room. Ethan tried to start a sentence 3 different times. Each time it broke against the truth like a wave that has forgotten how to climb. The movers were very still. They were the smartest men in the room for a minute because they knew the correct speed for stillness. I walked to the door, opened it wide, and gestured at the trucks. The night air slid in, cool and clean and sane. Take everything back, I said. No charge to them if it's any comfort to you. I will pay your fee for the night. One of the movers, a tall man with a tired face, gave me the smallest nod a man can give and still be seen. They began to lift the boxes again, this time with relief. Ethan's mother made a sound like air escaping a balloon. Ethan's father asked if we could at least keep the boxes in the garage overnight because it was raining and the glassware was delicate. I turned to him and shook my head once. Not today. You'd be in the way. My daughter spoke then, her voice raw like a page torn out of a book. Dad, please, she said. This is getting out of hand. I looked at her and the blanket, and the way her fingers dug into its edge to hold herself together. Liz, I said softly, you told me you didn't have room for me. You said it kindly, but it was still unkind. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I came inside to show you the truth we built together a long time ago. This house is mine. It isn't a hotel. It isn't a prize. It's our shelter. If you need room, I will always make room for you. But I won't bend for disrespect. She closed her eyes. Tears pushed out and balanced there without falling. I wanted to reach out and wipe them away like I used to. But I kept my hands at my sides because there are moments you let someone choose what to do with their own tears. Ethan took a step toward me, chest out like a rooster who doesn't know about foxes. You can't just bar my parents, he said. That's not how families work, I tilted my head. Families don't turn fathers away at midnight, I said simply. Families don't lie about space while trucks idle at the curb. Families don't take what's yours and tell you that you're a burden in your own home. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He swallowed. He looked at his parents. He looked at my daughter. Then he looked at the movers who were going in and out with that careful grace strong men have when they carry fragile things. The boxes went back into the trucks. The straps tightened. The gates closed. We signed papers at the kitchen table. Not new ones, acknowledgments. The lawyer had prepared them for exactly this outcome, because good lawyers listen when old men say, "I trust people, but I also know what rain feels like." Ethan's signature was a shaky line. His mother asked for a copy, and I gave her one because I wanted no ghosts in this house later. His father tried to smooth things with a few wise-sounding phrases about transitions and blending families. But words like that slide off hardwood if you haven't earned them with your hands. He shook my hand anyway. His grip was light. When they left, the night felt bigger, like a room when everyone finally goes home. I made tea because that is what you do when your heart has been wrung. I set a mug in front of my daughter. She didn't touch it. She looked at me and said, "I was scared, Dad." The words were small, but they were real. "Of what?" I asked. "Of everything," she said, and she looked down at her stomach and then away again. "Of the baby, of money. Of Ethan's parents taking over, of you being sick like Mom was, and me not knowing how to help, and the house turning into a battlefield." I sat across from her. In a low voice I said, "I can't promise this life will be easy. I can promise this house won't be a battlefield." The candle burned down to a little pool of liquid and then went out with a soft hiss, as if it was tired of drama. We sat in the dark kitchen and listened to the quiet of a place that had been defended with paper and calm. I slept in the back room that night, the one with the old dresser and the window that looks into the maple tree. I sleep light, the way men do when they have had to wake for night shifts and crying babies and hospice monitors. I woke once to the sound of a car door closing and tires rolling away. I did not get up to watch. In the morning I made eggs just like I used to. My daughter came into the kitchen with a face that looked older than yesterday. She said good morning like it was a fragile thing she was learning to hold again. We ate in silence for a while. Then she put her fork down and said, "I'm sorry." I nodded and said, "I know." She asked if I would stay for a while. I said, "Yes." She asked if there were rules. I said, "Just one, respect." She gave a small laugh that was almost a cough and said, "I can follow that." The days that followed were quiet, which is another way of saying they were healing. I fixed the leaky faucet. I oiled the hinges. I mailed the check to the moving company with a note that said, "Thank you for your patience." I found the baby's crib in a flat box on the front porch with the store's tag still on. It's a gift from someone who didn't wait for permission, and I built it. While my daughter read the instructions out loud and made fun of the tiny cartoon man holding a wrench. We did not talk about Ethan's parents. We did not talk about the night the trucks came. We talked about the baby's name and how Pepper's leaves were starting to turn, and how the corner store's owner still put the bruised apples in a bag and sold them for cheap to people who needed them. We stayed close to simple things because simple things are strong. On the third day, Ethan came back. He didn't storm in. He didn't bring an army. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets like a boy sent to apologize to the neighbor whose window he had broken. I opened the door and looked at him. He said hello and then looked at his shoes. "Can we talk?" he asked. "We are talking," I said. He took a breath. "I handled that wrong," he said, looking up. "My parents, they push." I let them push me. I thought if I gave them what they wanted, they'd leave us alone sooner. I told Liz we had no room because I was trying to solve a different problem without saying it out loud. I shouldn't have done it like that. "I'm sorry, Tom." He rubbed the back of his neck and then added, "Sir, it was clumsy." "It was also honest." I nodded once. "I care about my daughter," I said. "I care about this home. If you care about both of those things, we will find a way to live without poison in the walls." He nodded. He said he would set boundaries with his parents. I said I would make room for him as long as he kept respect in his mouth. We shook hands on it. His grip was firmer than the last time. He looked around the living room and saw the crib, and something in his face softened in a way I hadn't seen. He put his hand on the crib's rail and said almost to himself, I'm going to be a father. I wanted to say a dozen things about what that means, about what it takes to be steady and kind when your own bones ache and your wallet is a thin strip of leather. But I didn't lecture. I said, yes. And that means we get better, not worse. He asked if we could tell his parents the situation was settled. I said yes. He asked if he could make dinner that night. I said yes again. He went to the store and came back with more food than a small army could eat. He burned the first pan and laughed at himself in a way that didn't feel defensive. He set the table with care. My daughter smiled without fear for the first time in days. We ate, we talked about the baby again. The air in the house felt warmer. It felt like the first day of spring when you open a window just to hear the neighborhood breathe. There was one more thing I had to do, and I did it late one evening when the house was quiet. I went down to the crawl space with a headlamp and slid the safe out from where the plywood hides it. I turned the dial. The metal door lifted with a soft cough. Inside were the documents I had shown, folded with exactness, and a few letters my wife had written in the last month of her life. I held one. The paper had a weight to it, the way truth has a weight. I read her words again, the ones I already knew by heart. She had written about the house and the promise, and the way love, if tended, grows even after the body is done. She wrote, "If they ever forget what this place is for, remind them. But remind them softly." I put the letter back and closed the safe and slid it into darkness again, where it keeps its quiet watch. The baby came in early winter. The morning I drove them to the hospital, the air had that clean smell snow leaves behind, even when it doesn't fall. My daughter held my hand between contractions and crushed it with a strength I had forgotten she had. Ethan said a lot of encouraging words in a voice that shook and then steadied. In the waiting room, I looked at other fathers, younger, older, all of us with the same wide look like we were about to be tested on material we had read once a long time ago. When the baby arrived and they told us the name, Rose, after my wife, my heart did something I didn't know it could do anymore. It made a new room. When they came home, I hung a small wind chime on the porch. It made a sound like a polite bell every time the door opened, and it felt like a prayer without words. Things were not perfect after that. People don't become kind all at once and stay that way. Ethan's parents tried 2 or 3 more times to push limits. They said they wanted to spend a week bonding with the baby and brought suitcases to prove the point. They said their house had a water issue, and perhaps it would be practical for them to spend a few nights with us. Each time I stood in the door. Each time I used the same calm voice and the same simple words about respect and boundaries and what this house was for. Each time, something in their faces changed, like they had tried to move a stone and found it was part of the mountain. They began to call ahead. They began to visit for an hour instead of a weekend. They began to bring soup and leave on time. Even mountains can teach. Once, late at night, I sat in the dark living room with Rose asleep on my chest. The house made those small, honest noises wood makes in winter, little ticks and pops like it was keeping time with us. The maple tree scratched its fingers on the window, not in a scary way, just in that way trees talk when the wind has questions. I thought about the man in the mirror now, white in his beard, slower in his knees, and the man I used to be who could lift a transmission alone. I thought about the promise I made to my wife, and the promise my daughter will make to her child, without even knowing she is making it every time she opens the door on a cold night and says, "Come in." I realized the thing I had been feeling since the night of the trucks wasn't just anger or hurt. It was the sense that a line had been crossed and erased at once, and the world needed the line redrawn carefully. I will tell you the best part and the hardest part. The best part is simple. Laughter returned. It crept in small at first, like a shy cat. Then it sat at the table. Then it sprawled on the couch. We laughed at burnt pancakes and baby hiccups and how the dog we didn't own yet still somehow ate the corner of a rug. The hardest part, I had to admit I had been proud in a way that didn't help. I had shown my daughter only the strong parts of me for so long that when the weekday came, when I needed a couch and a cup of tea and a yes at the door, she could not see how to offer it. Her "we don't have room" was wrong, but it was also born from a story I had told with my own hands. I don't need help. And I had told it so well she believed it when she should not have. We fixed that by telling new stories out loud with small words and big clarity. Now she says, "Dad, how are you doing really?" and waits for the answer. Now I say, I could use help with the groceries, and she grabs her keys. On the 1-year mark of the night of the trucks, I grilled cheap steaks on the back deck in a mist that made the air taste like metal and mint. Ethan came out with 2 beers and handed me one. "You know," he said, "I had a dream for weeks after that night that I was standing in the doorway and a wave came down the street and I kept telling it we didn't have room, like I could talk it away. But it just kept coming, slow and quiet and unstoppable." I took a sip. "That wasn't a wave," I said. "That was a boundary." He nodded and made a face like I had just given him a tool he didn't know he needed. "Boundaries," he said, tasting the word. "Yeah." Then he added, "Thank you." It was the kind of thank you that closes a wound instead of just covering it. Sometimes I still wake at night and listen for trucks. It's a habit now. I listen for the sound of straps tightening in the dark, for the first heavy boot on a step, for the soft knock of someone who thinks paper does not matter because they own a louder voice. I breathe and remind myself that paper matters when it keeps a promise. I remind myself that my wife's letter sits silent and powerful and patient, and that I honored it not with shouting, but with a steady hand and a flat voice. I remind myself that I am not a guest in my life. When the house settles and the wind moves on, I go back to sleep. If you've watched me this far, I want you to remember one thing. The quiet man is not weak. He is careful. He is measuring. He is waiting to put his hand on the right lever. That night, when I stood in my daughter's kitchen with movers holding breath at the door and in-laws shifting on their perfect shoes and my daughter trying to be loyal to everyone at once, I did not win because I could roar. I won because I could show paper and look a man in the eyes and say, no. I won because love needs firmness to stand. I won because my wife's promise lived in me like a steady pilot light, always on, ready to catch. And in case you're still wondering about the title, yes, that night the trucks came. My daughter opened her door and saw them lined out like cattle in the cold, and Ethan walked forward with a little swagger. But his swagger vanished when he saw who was moving in. It wasn't his parents. It wasn't some new furniture to push out the old. It was me. It was the father he tried to edge off the porch with polite words. It was the man with the envelope, the deeds, and a memory long enough to span storms. I moved in with my quiet bag and my careful rules and my old wedding ring still circling a promise. He froze because for the first time he saw me not as a guest in his story, but as the owner of the house where that story would be told. So tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the city and the streetlight and the smell of your own porch after rain. And if this story found a place in you, if it reminded you that love and respect belong in the same room, then like, share, comment, and subscribe so more people hear it and remember to open the door the right way.